Hello Internet, and welcome to a new tutorial. Today's tutorial, we will continue our journey with the kick and snare patches on the Behringer Neutron. Now, if you're not aware of what's going on, I'll leave a link somewhere in here. But in a nutshell, I've been looking at recreating the kick and snare patches from the Moog DFAM, but on the Behringer Neutron. And while doing so, I've discovered like a whole new psychedelic dimension of the synthesizer. And it's all thanks to the fact that we're basically creating two patches running simultaneously on the same synthesizer. Now, in the first tutorial, we've created this dark foresty atmosphere. You can check it somewhere in here, link in the description too. And I consider this patch to be the simplest of them all. Today, we will push things in complexity and create this FM versus Squelch kind of patches. You can use it as a lead or as a complex texture that you will cherry pick, basically put it somewhere in the track as some sort of an ear candy or like this memorable lead or sound of the track. But before we dive into this tutorial, if you'd like to support the channel, you can consider becoming one of my patrons or buy my presets on Gumroad, or just leave a like, comment and subscribe. Things like that helps the channel a lot. Now with that said, let's dive into this tutorial. Alright, so here we are in front of the Neutron, and the first thing that we're going to do is basically prepare the synthesizer for patching, right? So since this is an FM versus Squelch kind of patch, we have both of them inside of it, the first oscillator is going to take care of the FM part. So what I'm going to do, I'll set it to full range and I'll leave it on sine. I think with the Neutron, FMing a sine wave sounds really good. So that's the first oscillator, basically sounds like this. Nothing too special, just a sine wave. Now, the second oscillator will take care of the squelch. To do so, again, full range, we really won't follow any pitch in this patch, so you can set the tuning the way you like, okay? Now, let's set it to a saw wave in here, and now we have this, basically. And to complete the squelch, we need a bandpass filter. So let's set the filter to bandpass, close it a little bit, give it some resonance. Now we have this. Nothing too special again. No mod depth in here, no envelope depth in here, all to 0. Now the LFO. The LFO will act as our third oscillator that will FM the first oscillator, right? So what I'm going to do, I'll set it to a ramp up like this shape, and I'll set the rate somewhere in here. As I said, since we're not following any pitch, we'll set it wherever, basically. And I'm going to key-sync it. This means that it's going to reset its phase every time it receives a new note. To be honest, I like the way it sounds like this, but this won't change dramatically the way the patch sounds. So just go experiment and set it to the shape you like, with or without the key-sync, as you wish, basically. Now let's move on to the first envelope in here. The second one, we won't be using it, so let's forget about it. And the first one will be just 0 attack, full sustain, and a tiny bit of release. Because this is one of the patches that we're going to feed it with an arpeggiated random sequence. It's playing one note with different gate lengths, basically, and random velocity. So we need just a tiny bit of release in here so it won't click, tiny bit of attack so it won't click, and full sustain. The rest will be sent from the DAW, basically. Now the rest in here is going to be set the way it is. We won't touch it. Now let's prepare the sample and hold circuit in here. So since we're sending a random arpeggiated sequence, I want the sample and hold to be synced to that. And the best way to do so is, as usual, send the MIDI gate to the sample and hold clock in here. So the sample and hold will fire a new random value every time it will receive a new MIDI note. Now, let's send the sample and hold to the multiplier because we need to modulate two different destinations with that. And now the synthesizer is ready for the complex patching of this patch. So let's start step by step. First, we will create the FM patch, then the squelch patch. So for the FM, the LFO will be FMing the first oscillator, as I mentioned. So what I'm going to do, I'll take the LFO output in here, I'll send it to the second attenuator. Like so, we'll get basically an amount knob for the FM effect. And now what I'll do, I'll send the second attenuator to the first oscillator. Now let's set the oscillator mix to first oscillator. Now we have basically this. Let's open the filter for now. Now, what's really interesting with the Neutron is that we have two LFO outputs in here. We have LFO bipolar output and LFO unipolar output. Check this out. When I set it to unipolar, we will get a different timbre. I personally like it with the unipolar output, but again, you can do whatever you desire. All right, now here's where the complex patching will start. We need to separate the FM from the squelch, right? So what I'm going to do, I'll send the first oscillator output, which is being FM'd, to the overdrive circuit by passing the filter, and from the overdrive, we'll go to the VCA, basically, right? To do so, it's really simple. We'll take the first oscillator output in here, we'll set it to the overdrive in, and from the overdrive output, we will go to the first summing in here. So we have sum 1 and sum 2. We'll go to the first one. Let's send it to sum B or sum A, wherever you like. And from the first sum, we'll go to the VCA. And now we've just bypassed basically the filter section and we've separated the two patches, right? So now with the overdrive, we can control the timbre of the FM and we can also control its level, right? Check this out. And with the tone, we can change the way the FM sounds and we can add more grittiness with the drive. Check this out. Perfect. So that's the FM part and isolated from the squelch. Now for the squelch, let's set the filter back to bandpass, give it some resonance like this. Now what I'm going to do, I'll take the second oscillator output like this. It'll go to the VCF, and from the VCF, it'll go to the first attenuator. Just like with the FM patch in here, the first attenuator will act as some sort of a dry wet knob or like an amount knob, if that makes sense, right? And from the attenuator, we will go to the first summing. Just like so, sum A. Let's disconnect the FM for a second, and now we basically have this. Perfect. Let's get the FM patch back to the summing. Now, you might be asking me, but why did we send the sample and hold to the multiplier? Now, here where the magic basically happens. So the first output of the multiplier will modulate the LFO rate. And this will spice up our FM, right? So now we basically have this. If we take the squelch, we'll get this. See, every time I hit a new note, we get a different timbre for this FM. And the second output of the multiplier will modulate the pitch of the second oscillator to get the squelch effect. Let's take the FM patch, give back the squelch. Now we have this. Perfect. And the last thing that I'm going to do to spice up this patch is, see this assign output in here? I'm going to make it send velocity information to the first attenuator CV in here. So we basically play with the level of the squelch and make it create some sort of a groove, if that makes sense. Because you know, our random arpeggiated sequence already have different velocity or basically random velocity values. So we can use these to create some groove and add more movement to the sound, right? And just to make sure that the assign output is set to velocity, we hit oscillator sync in here, and the LFO shape represents what the assign output is sending. When it's on ramp down like this means it's sending velocity. Let's take it back off. And now, with the kick and bass, a random arpeggiated sequence, and some delay, check what we will have. I can play with this for hours, and the synthesizer will keep on giving me more and more psychedelic juices. It's just amazing what you can do with it. And like the more you play with the parameters, basically the tuning of the oscillators, the tone of the overdrive, the attenuators in here, the more like weirdness gets out of it. And yeah, with this is the end of this tutorial. I really hope you've liked it. I really hope you've learned something new. See you next time.